In fur coat and cloche hat, here's Miss Greta Garbo of Sweden and the movies. It's the middle 1920s, with silent films still the best Hollywood fare. And Miss Garbo is at height of her career, fresh from dramatic triumphs in motion pictures with John Gilbert and other stars.
Picture this. The year is, let's say, 1932. You're smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. Life isn't exactly a picnic, but there's an escape. It flickers 20 feet tall in darkened palaces called movie theaters. And who dominates that flickering screen, that shared dreamscape? Her. You pick up a movie magazine, maybe Photoplay or Screenland, hoping for a bit of glamour to cut through the gloom. Whose face stares back, impossibly beautiful, impossibly distant? Hers. You gossip with your neighbors over the fence, talk about the stars, the scandals, the magic, whose name is whispered with a unique blend of awe and curiosity. Always, inevitably, her. At this moment, Greta Garbo isn't just a movie star. She is the movie star, the biggest, the most internationally adored, the most intensely obsessed over human being on the planet. Everyone wants a piece of her. Studios clamor for her signature, audiences flock to her films, journalists hound her for a quote, any quote. Her face isn't merely famous, it's a global phenomenon, an instantly recognizable icon, practically a geographical landmark etched onto the consciousness of millions. It's a face that embodies mystery, tragedy, passion, and an almost unbearable level of sophisticated allure. So what do you do when you possess that kind of power, that kind of universal adoration? What do you do when the world lays itself at your feet? If you're Greta Garbo, you do the most unexpected, most Garbo-esque thing imaginable. You essentially look the entire adoring world dead in the eye, maybe offer a ghost of a world-weary smile, and figuratively say, "Talk to the hand." Then you turn around and begin meticulously constructing a fortress of solitude, so formidable, so complete, that even Superman with his own icy retreat might pause, nod respectfully and say, "Whoa, okay, I get it. Respect the privacy." Intriguing. Doesn't even begin to cover it, right? Welcome, everyone. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive, a journey into the luminous darkness surrounding one of cinema's most profound and persistent enigmas, Greta Garbo. She was the ultimate paradox, wrapped in ridiculously chic couture provided by Adrian at MGM, but fundamentally uncomfortable in the spotlight she commanded. She was the face that launched 1,000 ships, and you get the distinct feeling she watched them sail, fervently wishing with every fiber of her being that they'd all just turn around, go somewhere else, and please just keep the noise down. We're exploring the life of a woman who climbed to the absolute, dizzying pinnacle of global fame, only to survey the landscape from that peak and find the view. Well, frankly, kind of annoying, maybe even terrifying. And that face. Seriously, we have to linger on the face, forget high definition, forget vibrant technicolor for just a moment, and travel back to the era of black and white, of silver nitrate. Even filtered through the grainy textures of early film, projected onto a distant screen. That face could communicate more than a 10-page monologue delivered by a lesser mortal. It wasn't just conventional beauty, though let's be absolutely clear. She possessed that in abundance, a stunning architecture of bone and light. No, it was something more potent, more unsettling. It was atmospheric pressure. It was pure mystery etched into the very structure of her being. Her eyes, often described as lakes or pools, seemed to hold entire galaxies of unspoken emotion, reflecting depths that hinted at ancient sorrows or profound contemplation. Her legendary stillness on screen wasn't emptiness. It screamed louder than any melodramatic outburst. She could shatter your heart with a single lingering glance, make you lean forward in your seat, unconsciously trying to decipher the whisper of a thought flickering behind that flawless melancholic mask. Critic Kenneth Tynan wasn't exaggerating when he famously wrote, "What when drunk one sees in other women, one sees in Garbo sober." She became inextricably linked with a line she uttered in the 1932 film Grand Hotel. "I want to be alone." It was spoken by her character, the fading ballerina Grusinskaya, but the world immediately fused it onto Garbo herself, taking it as a personal declaration, a motto for her own existence. Whether she truly meant it in that exact way, whether she perhaps resented the line becoming her defining quote, is part of the enigma. But regardless of her intent, that phrase became the haunting, recurring melody of her life, the theme music for her legendary retreat. This, then, is the sprawling, fascinating story of Greta Garbo, the Swedish Sphinx, the reluctant goddess, the screen deity who seemed allergic to adulation. We'll trace her improbable journey from Greta Lovisa Gustafsson, a shy, awkward girl, born into the rough-and-tumble working-class streets of Stockholm, who somehow metamorphosed into Garbo, the ethereal, untouchable icon. We're going deep, folks. We'll navigate the dazzling highs and challenging lows of her groundbreaking career, explore the whispered-about, fiercely guarded private life, and above all, follow the thread of her lifelong, almost obsessive quest for something that fame, fortune, and global adoration could never truly buy her. Simple, unadulterated peace and quiet. So find a comfortable spot. Maybe pour yourself a drink, something suitably contemplative perhaps. Buckle up. It's going to be a moody, glamorous, witty, and utterly unforgettable ride into the heart of a legend who wanted nothing more than to be left out of the very spotlight she so effortlessly commanded. Before we plunge into those formative years, in Stockholm, let me ask you this. What's the first image, the first feeling, the immediate gut reaction that pops into your head when you hear the name Greta Garbo? Is it the impossible glamour, the profound sense of mystery? Is it a specific pose, a scene from a film? Or is it that famous line about wanting solitude? Think about it. That immediate association speaks volumes about the power of her legend. So, how does one become Garbo? Is there a secret formula, a mystical initiation? Does one simply emerge, fully formed and world-weary, from a clamshell on the misty shores of the Baltic Sea, already draped in exquisite silks and radiating ennui? Yeah, as much as that image fits the myth, the reality is far more grounded, far more gritty. Our story begins not under the manufactured sunshine of Hollywood Klieg lights, but amidst the decidedly unglamorous, often harsh realities of the Södermalm district in Stockholm, Sweden, at the dawn of the 20th century. Forget any notion of silver spoons or inherited privilege. Greta Lovisa Gustafsson, born on September 18, 1905, entered a world defined less by champagne wishes and caviar dreams, and more by the damp chill of cobblestone streets, the pervasive smell of coal smoke from nearby factories, and the humble, often repetitive scent of boiled potatoes and, yes, quite probably, herring. Her family wasn't poor in that romanticized, struggling artist sort of way. They were simply starkly poor. It was a daily struggle for the basics. Her father, Carl Alfred Gustafsson, was a man buffeted by the winds of economic uncertainty, taking whatever work he could find, often unskilled, physically demanding labor like street cleaning, factory work, or helping out at a butcher shop. Anything to put food on the table, which, reports suggest, wasn't always guaranteed. Her mother, Anna Lovisa, was the stoic bedrock of the family, working tirelessly as a seamstress, mending clothes for others, and sometimes taking on cleaning jobs to supplement Carl's meager and often irregular income. It was a life lived perpetually, on the edge of financial insecurity. Little Greta wasn't an only child navigating this world alone. She had two older siblings who shared the close quarters and the family struggles, an older brother, Sven Alfred, and an older sister, Alva. Maria, imagine their home, likely a small tenement apartment in one of Södermalm's less fashionable quarters. Garbo herself, in rare later-life interviews, and certainly emphasized by meticulous biographers like Barry Paris in his definitive work Garbo, described a living space that was small, incredibly cramped, the kind of place where the concept of personal privacy was an unimaginable luxury, perhaps something encountered only in the pages of fancy books depicting aristocratic lives. Forget the cozy, curated Scandinavian hygge aesthetic we associate with Sweden today. Think more along the lines of sardines packed tightly, albeit perhaps with a certain inherent Swedish tidiness, into a stylishly distressed tin can. Personal space? A foreign concept. Dreams, however, seemingly had unlimited room to expand, pushing against the low ceilings and thin walls. Looking at the few surviving early photographs of young Greta Gustafsson, you don't immediately glimpse the future screen siren, the icon of glacial allure. What you see is often a tall, somewhat gangly child, perhaps a bit awkward in her rapidly growing frame, with startlingly large, incredibly serious eyes that seem to hold the weight of the world already. Was she consciously practicing that signature world-weary gaze, the one that would later melt hearts and convey volumes across continents? Or was she just pondering the eternal practical question of what might be for dinner, and fervently hoping it wasn't boiled herring for the third time that week? Barry Paris notes she was widely regarded as a solemn child, prone to daydreaming, often finding refuge in fantasy and imaginative play. Even then, perhaps she was already constructing elaborate inner worlds, realms far grander, far more interesting than the often drab reality of her immediate surroundings. She reportedly loved make-believe, creating characters and scenarios, an early indication of the performer lurking within. Life wasn't entirely devoid of warmth or joy, however. Her father, Carl, despite the constant financial pressures and the toll of hard labor, is generally remembered as a warm, engaging figure within the family. He possessed a certain charm, and importantly for young Greta's development, a genuine love for the theater. He was a storyteller, someone who could spin a yarn and capture his children's imaginations. Whenever he could scrape together the few euro required, he would reportedly take the children to see plays or variety shows, opening a small window onto a world of performance and transformation. It's easy to see how these occasional excursions might have ignited young Greta's imagination, planting the initial seeds of theatrical ambition in her fertile mind. He encouraged her games of pretend, perhaps unknowingly nurturing the nascent actress yearning for expression. He represented a connection, however tenuous, to a world beyond the daily grind. But this fragile stability, this source of warmth and imaginative spark, was cruelly extinguished. Tragedy struck the Gustafsson family early and with devastating force. In 1920, when Greta was just 14 years old, her beloved father, Carl, succumbed to the virulent Spanish flu pandemic that was mercilessly carving its way across Europe and the world. He was only in his late 40s. This wasn't just a profound emotional blow for the sensitive, father-adoring teenager. It was an immediate and dire economic catastrophe for the entire family. Carl, despite his struggles, had been the primary breadwinner. His death plunged the family, already teetering on the brink, into genuine hardship. The loss cast a long, dark and permanent shadow over the Gustafsson household and undoubtedly over young Greta's developing psyche. In one of her rare reflections on this period, she confessed years later, "His death was a terrible blow. It seemed to me then that everything that was beautiful had sunk out of sight." That beauty, perhaps, included the security and simple joys associated with her father. Suddenly, the already solemn child had no choice but to confront the harsh realities of adult responsibility. The luxury of extended daydreaming, the relative freedom of childhood, evaporated overnight. Playtime was definitively over, abruptly replaced by the urgent, grinding necessity of survival. The family needed income, and Greta, along with her mother and siblings, had to contribute. This early, profound loss, coupled with the stark reality of the family's precarious financial state, likely forged deep within her a powerful lifelong craving for security, for control over her own destiny. It's not difficult to hypothesize how losing her father so young, experiencing such vulnerability, might have fueled the deep-seated desire for independence, the fierce protection of her own resources, and perhaps the cultivation of that famous, emotional guardedness that would later become a defining characteristic of her public persona. The weight of the world, heavy with grief and responsibility, settled firmly onto those young, slender shoulders, and the quiet, observant girl from Zodamalm began, out of sheer necessity, to build the foundations of her remarkable resilience. With her father gone and the family coffers desperately empty, continuing her formal education became an impossibility. School, which she reportedly wasn't overly fond of anyway, feeling awkward and out of place, became a luxury the Gustafsons simply couldn't afford. Around the age of 13 or 14, accounts vary slightly, Greta left school for good. Her entry into the working world wasn't exactly auspicious, certainly not hinting at future stardom. Her first documented job was as a TiVo flicker, essentially a soap lather girl in a neighborhood barbershop. Can you just picture it? The tall, serious teenager, the future icon of glacial glamour, awkwardly asking gruff Swedish men if they required a shave, meticulously working up a rich lather in a mug with a brush. It's a mental image so jarringly at odds with the sophisticated screen goddess we remember. Talk about starting at the bottom rung. According to detailed accounts in Karen Swenson's biography, Greta Garbo, A Life Apart, this menial job, while humbling, offered young Greta a unique, albeit limited window into the everyday lives and conversations of ordinary people, a world beyond her immediate family and neighborhood. It was perhaps her first exposure to performing a service, however small, for strangers. Her next step represented a slight move up the social and economic ladder, though still firmly within the working class. She managed to land a job at the EU prestigious PUB department store, a well-known landmark in central Stockholm. This felt perhaps a tiny bit more aligned with a future involving presentation and aesthetics. She started working in the millinery department, selling ladies' hats. Now this has a faint echo of future possibilities, doesn't it? Assisting customers, understanding style, adjusting angles, finding the perfect flattering tilt for a cloche or bonnet. Perhaps this was the very first stage where she began, consciously or unconsciously, to learn about the power of visual presentation, about how a simple accessory could transform a look, project a mood, create an illusion. One can easily imagine the young Garbo, already possessing an innate, if undeveloped, sense of style and a critical eye, silently judging the customer's choices. Nay, she might have thought with her characteristic seriousness. That brim is simply tragic on you, madam. Far too fussy. But the PUB department store offered more than just the drudgery and small commissions of retail work. It was here, amidst the bolts of fabric, the displays of sensible shoes and the fashionable hats, that fate, or perhaps more accurately, her striking and unusual facial structure, intervened. Her tall, slender frame and that unique, expressive face with its melancholic gravity caught the eye of someone involved in the store's advertising, or perhaps a filmmaker shooting promotional material. Soon, young Greta Gustafsson found herself modeling hats for the store's catalogs, static, images capturing her serious beauty, and then came the crucial leap, the first flicker of her image captured on moving film. She appeared in short advertising films, essentially primitive commercials, commissioned by PUB in 1920 and 1921. One, charmingly titled Herr och Fru Stockholm, was a slice-of-life promotional piece showing ordinary Stockholmers shopping. Another, How Not to Dress, used her to demonstrate fashion faux pas, and perhaps most notably in En Lyckoridar, she had a small role, reportedly even appearing briefly in swimwear alongside other young women. From meticulously fluffing hat feathers to posing, likely somewhat awkwardly, for the nascent motion picture camera, who could have guessed that headwear and early rudimentary advertising films held such potent star-making potential? One wonders if those specific hats she modeled flew off the shelves instantly. Get the Gustafsson look. They probably didn't advertise, but perhaps in hindsight they should have. Yet even amidst the daily grind of lathering strangers' beards and patiently selling hats to demanding customers, the real passion, the secret fire within her, burned brightly and steadfastly: the theatre. From a very young age, fueled by her father's enthusiasm and her own introverted nature seeking an outlet, Greta harbored deep, persistent dreams of becoming an actress. She and her neighborhood friends would reportedly stage their own amateur plays in courtyards or back rooms, fueled by stories her father had shared and the potent escapism offered by Stockholm's legitimate stages and, increasingly, the flickering, silent images projected onto makeshift movie screens. Film historian Robert Gottlieb, in his insightful study Garbo, emphasizes this early, almost desperate devotion to performance as a means of transcendence. She wasn't just dreaming of escaping the tangible constraints of poverty. She was dreaming of escaping the intangible confines of her own shy, serious, perhaps melancholic personality. She yearned for the magic of transformation, the ability to become someone else entirely, someone bolder, more expressive, more alive, under the protective magic spell of the stage or the camera lens. "I was always dreaming of becoming an actress," she admitted straightforwardly in a rare later interview. "It was my only ambition. There was no plan B." This wasn't merely a childish flight of fancy. It felt, by all accounts, like a fundamental need, a potential lifeline out of her circumstances and perhaps out of herself. The stage, and by extension the screen, represented a controlled world, a realm where she could potentially craft the narrative, where she could evoke powerful emotions, sadness, longing, joy, without necessarily having to explain or expose her own inner workings, something that would become a defining characteristic of her later screen persona and her off-screen reticence. You can clearly see the seeds being sown here, even in these early difficult years. The profound desire for transformation, the craving for control over her environment and how she was perceived. Perhaps even the nascent understanding that performance could offer a unique form of structured solitude within the very public act of being watched. Was the stage her first instinctive attempt at crafting a world where she dictated the terms of engagement, where she decided who got close, who saw what facet of her being, even while thousands might be observing? It's a compelling and provocative thought, isn't it? The serious soap girl from Södermalm, dreaming of spotlights, already unconsciously mapping out her escape route, not just from poverty, but perhaps from the overwhelming burden of simply being Greta Gustafsson. Let's try to paint a clearer picture of the specific world, the environment that was shaping young Greta Gustafsson in those formative years. Stockholm in the early 1900s wasn't the sleek, globally recognized hub of design and progressive social policy that we might envision today. It was a city in transition, rapidly industrializing, smokestacks beginning to punctuate the historic skyline, but still deeply marked by ingrained class divisions and a certain societal stiffness, perhaps, influenced by a strong Lutheran heritage that emphasized duty, hard work, and a degree of emotional reserve. For a young woman like Greta, growing up in the working-class enclave of Södermalm, the horizons could often feel distinctly, depressingly limited. Society remained quite hierarchical, and genuine opportunities for significant advancement, especially for women aspiring to roles beyond the traditional domestic sphere or low-paid labor, weren't exactly abundant or easily accessible. You generally stayed in the lane you were born into. Furthermore, the long shadow of World War I had recently fallen across Europe. Even though Sweden remained officially neutral, the conflict's economic repercussions were strongly felt. Rationing, shortages, and a general atmosphere of seriousness and belt-tightening permeated daily life. It wasn't an era of frivolity or easy optimism. It was largely about endurance, about making do, about getting through the day, the week, the long, dark winter. Confronted with this reality, you essentially had two choices. You could resign yourself to the predictable rhythm of the daily grind, accepting that the grey Swedish winters might mirror a potentially grey and unchanging future, or you had to nurture dreams that were extraordinarily audaciously big. Guess which path our determined Greta was already instinctively choosing? Now let's be clear, this isn't intended as shade towards Stockholm. Seriously, it's a beautiful city, and we universally appreciate its contributions. From sensible furniture, designed to delicious meatballs, to a general vibe of cool, understated competence. But put yourself in Greta's worn-out shoes for a moment. Let's be real. Who wouldn't be powerfully tempted to trade those endless, gloomy winters where darkness descends mid-afternoon, the smell of the tannery down the street, and the seemingly immutable prospect of a lifetime spent selling sensible shoes or scrubbing floors, for the fantastical promise of, say, Southern California sunshine filtering through palm trees, sprawling mansions with swimming pools, and a weekly paycheck containing an almost comical number of zeros. It's more than understandable. It's practically inevitable for someone with ambition. The sheer, staggering contrast between her everyday reality, the overcrowded tenement apartment, the physically demanding low-status jobs, the restrictive, societal expectations for a girl of her class, and the luminous, impossibly glamorous, larger-than-life world flickering on those silent movie screens must have been overwhelming, almost painful in its allure. Think about the broader cultural context of the time. Silent film was exploding as a truly global phenomenon. Movie stars like Mary Pickford, the ethereal Lillian Gish, or the swashbuckling Douglas Fairbanks weren't just actors. They were international icons, modern royalty living seemingly enchanted lives chronicled in fan magazines that circulated worldwide, even reaching working-class Stockholm. For a girl like Greta, already harboring a deep love for theatre and performance, who reportedly felt awkward, shy, and profoundly uncomfortable in her own skin in everyday social situations, the magnetic pull of becoming someone else entirely, someone admired, desired, powerful, and commanding attention simply by existing on screen must have been utterly intoxicating. Cinema offered not just temporary escapism for its audiences, but represented, for a select few, with the right combination of looks, talent, and luck, a potential, literal escape route from mundane reality. It was a portal to another dimension. The environment Greta grew up in undoubtedly fostered certain key traits: a stoicism born from observing her parents' struggles, a resilience forged by necessity, a deep understanding of the value of hard work and money. But it also likely acted as a powerful crucible, forging her fierce ambition and perhaps contributing significantly to her deep-seated, lifelong need for privacy and control. When you grow up with virtually no personal space, sharing cramped quarters with family, you might later guard your private sphere with an almost obsessive ferocity once you finally attain it. When you experience the feeling of powerlessness against larger economic and social forces, witnessing your family's vulnerability, you might instinctively grasp tightly, perhaps even ruthlessly, to any semblance of control you can exert over your career, your image, your finances, your life. The perceived distance between her reality, the quiet, serious daughter of a sanitation worker and a seamstress, and her audacious ambition to become not just an actress but a great actress, recognized and respected, was simply astronomical. Bridging that chasm required more than just raw talent or a unique face. It demanded an almost ferocious, unwavering willpower, a laser-like focus, and the courage to even contemplate such a leap against formidable odds. So picture her there, this determined, introspective young woman, profoundly shaped by early loss, hardened by the demands of manual labor, yet simultaneously fueled by dreams far bigger and brighter than her cramped Stockholm apartment could possibly contain. She possessed the essential grit, hammered out on the anvil of hardship. She possessed the burning ambition, a quiet but intense fire within. And crucially, undeniably, she possessed that face, a face that seemed capable of expressing the deepest sorrows and the most subtle nuances of the human heart without needing words. Unbeknownst to her, she was standing on the precipice of a seismic shift, a change that would not only transform her life, but also leave an indelible mark on cinematic history. She had the raw materials. The next critical step: finding someone with the vision, the influence, and the sheer force of personality to recognize the diamond hidden in the rough, and who possessed the skill and determination to polish it for the world stage. Hollywood wasn't just calling her name yet. It was about to get an operator named Maurits Stiller on the line, placing a fateful call from across the Atlantic, initiating a connection that would irrevocably alter the course of Greta Gustafsson's life and, by extension, the trajectory of 20th century film. Stay with us as we witness Garbo's dramatic, tumultuous entry onto the world stage, a journey orchestrated by a Svengali and destined for greatness. All right. So we left our young Greta Gustafsson in Stockholm, armed with grit, ambition, and a face that could launch 1,000 ships. She'd had a tiny, tantalizing taste of the camera's lens through those pubby department store ads, but making the colossal leap from modeling sensible headwear to captivating global audiences as a dramatic actress. That required more than just wishful thinking. It needed a catalyst, a guide, a powerful push onto the right stage. Enter stage right, the formidable figure of Maurits Stiller. Our Greta, intensely serious about her only ambition, knew instinctively that raw talent wasn't enough. She needed proper training, the kind of rigorous instruction that could hone her instincts and provide her with technique and credibility. Fueled by that now familiar sheer determination, she applied and, against considerable odds for a girl of her background, managed to secure a coveted scholarship to Sweden's most prestigious acting institution, the Royal Dramatic Theatre's acting school in Stockholm, starting in 1922. This was a monumental step. This wasn't some amateur dramatic society. This was the hallowed ground of Swedish theatre, the training academy that had produced generations of legendary actors. Ingmar Bergman would later study and work there. Getting accepted was a validation, a sign that her dream wasn't entirely delusional. And it was here, amidst the dusty rehearsal rooms, the intense vocal exercises, and the demanding study of classic plays, that her path fatefully intersected with the man who would become her Pygmalion, her mentor, her champion, her discoverer, and arguably for a time, her controller, the renowned film director Maurits Stiller. Stiller was already a towering figure in the burgeoning Swedish film industry, a director known for his artistic ambition, his visually striking films, his often flamboyant personality, and his notoriously demanding, even tyrannical approach. To his actors, he was a force of nature. Picture this larger-than-life character, perhaps observing acting students during a class or screen test, his sharp eyes scanning for unique potential. Legend has it, and with figures like Stiller and Garbo, legend often intertwines with fact, that he spotted this tall, intense, somewhat awkward, but undeniably arresting student. Maybe it was during a school production, or perhaps in a brief screen test arranged for aspiring actors. The story goes that Stiller basically pointed, in that imperious dramatic director fashion and declared something along the lines of that one. She has something extraordinary. Forget the others. She is the one. She's going to be a star. Don't argue with me. Okay, perhaps the actual words were less theatrical, but the impact was the same. He saw something profound beneath the shyness, something that transcended her working-class background and lack of polish. He recognized the raw, magnetic potential shimmering beneath the surface. As Garbo herself later acknowledged, Stiller taught me how to live, how to think, how to feel. He essentially perceived the nascent Garbo persona within Greta Gustafsson before anyone else did, possibly even before she fully recognized it herself. He became her Svengali. Stiller didn't just discover her. In many ways, he actively invented the screen persona of Greta Garbo. He took the raw clay of Greta Gustafsson and began meticulously molding her. He bestowed upon her the name Greta Garbo, a name he reportedly concocted because it sounded more sophisticated, more memorable, more internationally resonant, and carried a certain air of mystery compared to the common Swedish surname Gustafsson. He then made a decision that would catapult her career forward. He cast her, this relatively inexperienced drama student, in a major leading role in his incredibly ambitious, sprawling historical epic, The Saga of Gösta Berling, released in 1924. This wasn't some minor supporting part. It was the complex role of Countess Elizabeth Dohna in a prestigious production based on a Nobel laureate's beloved novel. For a young woman still learning her craft, it was akin to being thrown into the deep end of the Baltic Sea during a hurricane, with the expectation of swimming like a champion. And folks, let's reiterate. Silent film acting in the 1920s was an art form utterly dependent on the face and body. Forget witty dialogue or perfectly timed verbal punchlines. You had to convey a universe of emotions, passionate love, devastating loss, treacherous betrayal, quiet despair, perhaps even the simple desire for a good cup of coffee, all through the subtle language of your eyes, the tension in your posture, the precise tilt of your head, the flicker of an expression. And Garbo's face, even then, guided by Stiller's demanding direction. It was already a symphony of nuanced expression. It possessed an extraordinary capacity to register complex inner states, to tell a sprawling 3-volume Swedish novel's worth of emotional turmoil without uttering a single audible syllable. Gösta Berling, despite being financially challenging for Stiller, was a significant critical success, particularly in Sweden and Germany. And Garbo, despite her youth and relative lack of professional experience, made an immediate and undeniable impact. Critics noted her naturalism, her emotional depth, and her arresting screen presence. The camera didn't just like her, it adored her, seemed drawn to her like a magnet. Stiller knew, with absolute certainty, that he had unearthed cinematic gold. News of Stiller's directorial prowess, and increasingly whispers about his strikingly beautiful and talented new protégé, began to travel across the Atlantic, eventually reaching the hungry, ever-expanding empire of Hollywood. Specifically, these whispers reached the powerful, discerning ears of Louis B. Mayer, the formidable head of production at the newly formed powerhouse studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Mayer, always on the lookout for European talent that could lend prestige to his studio, was impressed by Stiller's work. He saw the director's undeniable artistry, his sophisticated visual style, and wanted to harness that talent for MGM's glittering dream factory. So in 1925, Mayer dispatched an offer: come to Hollywood, work for MGM, the biggest and best studio in the world. But Stiller, ever the strategist and fiercely protective of his discovery, played hardball. He wasn't coming alone. His acceptance, the story goes, came with a non-negotiable condition. He reportedly told MGM's representatives something to the effect of, "Yes, I will come, but only if you also sign my protégée, the young actress Greta Garbo. We come as a package deal, or not at all." Imagine the scene in Maya's opulent office. Who? Garbo? Greta Hubo? Never heard of her. Is she blonde? Does she look like Mary Pickford? Can she bake an apple pie and smile for the cameras? MGM executives, focused on acquiring the famous director, weren't exactly thrilled about the prospect of importing this unknown, seemingly sullen-looking Swedish girl whom Stiller insisted on dragging along like some kind of artistic excess baggage. They wanted the established name, the proven talent, not his pet project. Little did they know, in that moment of reluctant agreement, they hadn't just signed a potentially difficult European director. They had inadvertently imported pure, unadulterated, transcendent star power, and simultaneously a future source of legendary contract disputes, epic battles of will, and studio-sized headaches that would become the stuff of Hollywood legend. Hollywood in the Roaring Twenties had very specific, often rigidly enforced, ideas about what a movie starlet should look and act like. The ideal was often bubbly, blonde, conventionally pretty in a wholesome, approachable way, and above all, perpetually smiling and cooperative for the publicity machine. Garbo, arriving in 1925 with Stiller, was, well, none of those things. She was tall, almost lanky at the time, brunette, arrestingly beautiful, but in an unconventional, almost severe way, and radiated an unmistakable aura of "please don't talk to me unless it is absolutely artistically necessary, and perhaps not even then." MGM, in its initial wisdom, immediately set about trying to fix her, to mold her into their standard starlet template. They wanted to Americanize the Swedish Sphinx, sand off her exotic edges. Reports from the time, detailed in various biographies, suggest the studio applied significant pressure. They allegedly insisted she lose weight. They wanted to fix her teeth, which weren't the perfectly aligned Hollywood chiclets they preferred. They urged her to pluck her naturally expressive eyebrows into the thin, fashionable arches of the day. They tried to teach her to smile more readily, to project a sunnier disposition for the cameras and the press. Essentially, they tried to turn the unique, melancholic swan into a generic, cheerful duckling. Can you just imagine trying to put excessive glitter and a forced, insincere smile on the Mona Lisa? It feels almost blasphemous in retrospect. But Garbo, even then, barely out of her teens and navigating a foreign land and a bewildering industry, possessed an innate, almost steely, sense of self and a stubborn, deeply ingrained resistance to being fundamentally altered or packaged into something she wasn't. Biographer Barry Paris suggests she tolerated some superficial adjustments, but fundamentally, instinctively resisted the full Hollywood makeover. Thankfully for cinema history, her sheer unique Garbo-ness, that captivating otherness, that profound inner gravity, proved stronger and ultimately more marketable than the studio's initial attempts at cookie-cutter conformity. They might have tweaked the frame slightly, but the essential masterpiece within remained defiantly, magnificently original. Meanwhile, Stiller, the man who had brought her there, was struggling mightily within the MGM system. His autocratic, artist-centric European directorial style clashed spectacularly with the factory-like efficiency and producer-driven hierarchy of a major Hollywood studio. His first American film assignment was fraught with production issues, budget overruns, and creative interference. He wasn't thriving, so MGM, perhaps eager to see what this Garbo girl could do on her own, or perhaps just needing product for their pipeline, decided to test out Stiller's protégé without him. They cast her in The Torrent, a rather standard, somewhat overwrought melodrama based on a novel by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez. Garbo reportedly despised the role of Leonora, the Spanish peasant girl who becomes an opera diva. She found the character superficial, the story cliched, the costumes ridiculous. She clashed with the director, Montebell, feeling lost, misunderstood, and deeply unhappy without Stiller's familiar guidance and artistic validation. She felt adrift, convinced her American career was doomed before it even began. But here's the astonishing kicker. Audiences didn't give a fig if she hated the role or the movie. They were instantly, utterly mesmerized by her. The Torrent, despite its formulaic plot and Garbo's own dissatisfaction, was a surprise box office hit, largely propelled by the magnetic, almost hypnotic presence of this unknown Swedish actress. Her performance, even in a film she personally scorned, possessed it, that indefinable luminous star quality that transcends script and direction. Critics, while perhaps lukewarm on the film itself, raved about her. They praised her expressive eyes, her surprising naturalism amidst the melodrama, her sheer, captivating screen presence. Suddenly, Louis B. Mayer and the MGM executives realized that the excess baggage Stiller had insisted upon might actually be the main attraction, the golden ticket they hadn't even known they possessed. Riding the unexpected wave of the Torrent's success, MGM wasted no time. They quickly cast her again, this time in a project with potentially explosive chemistry, pairing her opposite the studio's reigning king of silent screen romance, the impossibly dashing, charismatic matinee idol, John Gilbert, in a film aptly titled Flesh and the Devil. And folks, if the Torrent was a spark, this was cinematic, spontaneous combustion. The chemistry between Garbo and Gilbert wasn't just acting, it was a palpable, almost dangerous electrical current caught on celluloid. Sparks flew on screen as they enacted a tempestuous, forbidden love story, and by all credible accounts, those same sparks ignited a real-life inferno off-screen as well, creating one of Hollywood's most legendary and ultimately tragic romances. Audiences went absolutely, deliriously nuts. They had never seen anything quite like the intensity and raw passion radiating between Garbo and Gilbert. Their love scenes were considered shockingly intimate, startlingly realistic for the era. One famous review from the influential Photoplay magazine basically declared their scenes together were so hot they could have melted the film right in the projector. Flesh and the Devil became a massive blockbuster, a cultural sensation. It cemented Garbo not just as a star, but as a major phenomenon, a new kind of screen goddess, alluring, mysterious, and radiating a sophisticated sexuality that was worlds away from the flapper archetype. The reluctant starlet, the awkward girl. From Södermalm, the director's protégé, she had well and truly arrived. Hollywood hadn't just called, it had surrendered to her unique power. Greta Garbo was here, unequivocally, and the movies, the very definition of stardom, would never, ever be the same. But the journey to becoming the undisputed, isolated queen of the MGM lot, that was just beginning. And it would involve daunting new challenges, learning to talk on screen, learning to laugh for the camera, and learning to conquer the formidable beast of the studio system itself. So, Garbo mania was officially ignited, sweeping across America and then the world, fueled by that electrifying, almost scandalous on-screen chemistry with John Gilbert, and cemented by her own undeniable, unique screen magic. But just as she reached the zenith of silent film stardom, Hollywood was undergoing a seismic, earth-shattering transformation, the advent of sound, the talkies. Suddenly, the visual poetry of silent acting wasn't enough. Actors weren't just captivating faces anymore. They needed voices that matched, voices that could deliver dialogue convincingly. And for many established silent stars, this technological revolution was the ultimate terror, the potential career killer. Would their voices sound thin, reedy, or just plain wrong coming out of their iconic screen personas? Would thick regional or foreign accents prove unintelligible or, worse, unintentionally comical, derailing carefully crafted images? The pressure on Garbo, MGM's biggest international silent draw, the enigmatic Swede whose mystique was so tied to her expressive silence, was absolutely immense. The entire industry held its breath. Could the Sphinx speak? And if so, what would she sound like? MGM, ever the masters of showmanship and hype, understood the dramatic potential of this moment. They cannily milked the anticipation for all it was worth. They strategically delayed Garbo's sound debut, letting the suspense build to fever pitch while other stars rushed, sometimes disastrously, into talking pictures. Finally, in 1930, the moment arrived. The vehicle chosen was Anna Christie, a gritty, atmospheric drama based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning play by Eugene O'Neill. The advertising campaign was a masterpiece of minimalist brilliance, consisting of just 2 electrifying words splashed across posters and marquees nationwide. Garbo talks. Can you even imagine the atmosphere inside those packed movie palaces? Audiences leaning forward in their seats, hearts pounding, holding their collective breath. Would the voice shatter the carefully constructed illusion? Would the magic evaporate with the first spoken word? Then, she appeared on screen, emerging from the fog onto a grimy waterfront set, playing the disillusioned, world-weary title character. She projected that familiar aura of profound sadness and resignation. She walked into a smoky dockside saloon, slumped wearily onto a chair at a sticky table, and finally, after what must have felt like an eternity to the audience, uttered those first instantly immortal lines, delivered in a low, deliberate growl. "Give me a whiskey ginger ale on the side, and don't be stingy, baby." And the world collectively exhaled, and then erupted in relief and wonder. That voice. It wasn't thin or high-pitched. It wasn't grating. It was deep, husky, resonant, laced with that undeniably captivating Swedish accent, a rich, velvety contralto that sounded, as famously described, like velvet dipped in whiskey. It was smooth, slightly dangerous, hinting at hidden depths and past sorrows, and utterly, completely intoxicating. It wasn't just a voice. It was another layer added to the complex enigma of Garbo. Far from diminishing her mystique or hurting her career, sound enhanced it, added a new dimension of sophisticated worldliness. Anna Christie was a massive critical and commercial success, silencing all doubts and earning Garbo her very first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. The Sphinx had spoken, and her voice was as mesmerizing as her face. The world didn't just listen, it leaned in closer, utterly captivated. With her voice now firmly established as part of the legend, Garbo's reign as MGM's undisputed queen intensified throughout the early 1930s. She, along with her studio collaborators, carefully selected roles that amplified her unique aura of mystery, glamour, and profound emotional depth. In Mata Hari, she tackled the role of the infamous World War I spy and exotic dancer, a figure already shrouded in legend and notoriety. Talk about perfect casting. Playing the ultimate enigmatic femme fatale, a woman who used her allure and intelligence for espionage, draped in fabulous jewels and shadowy secrecy. That wasn't work for Garbo. That probably felt like simply tapping into a facet of her own complex persona. She exuded danger, sophisticated allure, and a deep underlying sadness, transforming the potentially one-dimensional historical figure into a creature of tragic grandeur and compelling ambiguity. Decked out in some of Adrian's most outrageously opulent costumes, Garbo's Mata Hari became an instant icon of exotic glamour, and the film was another huge box office smash, further solidifying her image as a creature of intoxicating mystery and potent desire. Then came the star-studded extravaganza Grand Hotel. This was arguably the original ensemble blockbuster, a formula MGM perfected, featuring a dazzling cast of the studio's biggest names, trapped together in a luxurious Berlin hotel over a tumultuous weekend. Garbo shared the screen with luminaries like John Barrymore, Joan Crawford, Wallace Beery, and Lionel Barrymore. Garbo played Grusinskaya, a celebrated Russian ballerina nearing the end of her career, melancholic, isolated, and yearning for meaning. And it was here, amidst the opulent Art Deco sets and interwoven dramatic storylines of this cinematic behemoth, that she delivered the line that would become her unavoidable epitaph, the phrase destined to follow her for the rest of her life and beyond: "I want to be alone." Oh, the delicious, inescapable irony. Uttering this poignant plea for solitude on screen, embodying the isolation of fame, only served to make the global public more intensely obsessed with her, more desperate to somehow breach the carefully constructed walls of her privacy. Grand Hotel was a phenomenon, winning the Academy Award for Best Picture, remarkably the only film in Oscar history to ever win the top prize without receiving a single other nomination in any category. And Garbo's iconic line became instantly, irrevocably intertwined with her own off-screen persona, a shorthand for her legendary elusiveness. Now, if you delve into the passionate discourse of Garbo aficionados, film historians, or indeed consider Garbo's own rare comments on her work, many will point towards Queen Christina as perhaps her most definitive, most personal, and artistically satisfying screen achievement. And reportedly, it was one of her own personal favorites among her films. Here, under the sensitive direction of Ruben Mamoulian, she portrayed the complex, real-life 17th century Swedish queen who famously abdicated her throne, defying expectations of gender, duty, and love. This wasn't just another lavish historical costume drama. It was a remarkably sophisticated, nuanced exploration of profound themes: the burden of leadership versus personal desire, the constraints of gender identity in a patriarchal world, the search for authenticity, the ultimate sacrifice for love. Garbo, dressed in strikingly masculine attire for significant portions of the film, commanded the screen with an astonishing blend of regal authority, intellectual curiosity, playful androgyny, and deep, heartbreaking vulnerability. It was a role that allowed her to explore ambiguity and strength in ways few other parts offered. And that ending, that final shot, it remains legendary, one of the most discussed and analyzed moments in cinema history. Okay, we absolutely need to talk about the final close-up of Queen Christina. No major plot spoilers here, but trust me on the power of this image. Queen Christina, having made immense personal sacrifices for love and freedom, stands at the prow of a ship sailing away from her kingdom into an uncertain future. Her face is turned towards the wind and her destiny. The director Ruben Mamoulian famously gave Garbo a deceptively simple instruction for this crucial, dialogue-free moment. "I want your face to be a blank sheet of paper. I want the writing to be done by every member of the audience." He asked her to think of nothing, to empty her mind, allowing her face to become a canvas onto which viewers could project their own interpretations, their own emotions. And she delivers magnificently. For what feels like an eternity, the camera holds tight on her face. Just Garbo, the wind whipping her hair, the sound of the sea. And across that incredible face flickers an entire ocean of unspoken, ambiguous emotion. Is it loss, resolve, regret, stoicism, numbness, freedom, hope? It's somehow all there and none of it, simultaneously. It's pure cinematic poetry, a transcendent moment, a masterclass in minimalist acting where the slightest shift in her eyes, the subtle tension around her mouth, speaks volumes more than any speech could. Seriously, if you ever watch only one Greta Garbo scene in your entire life, make it that one. It's a moment that transcends mere acting. It achieves the level of profound art. This film, and particularly this enigmatic ending, perhaps more than any other single work, became her symbolic centerpiece, showcasing her artistic power, her profound ambiguity, and her ultimate control over her unique cinematic image. For years, Garbo had reigned supreme as the queen of tragedy, the high priestess of sophisticated suffering, the empress of exquisite ennui. Critics adored her, audiences worshipped her, but could she do anything else? Could the great tragedienne, the woman whose face seemed carved for expressing the sorrows of the world, actually laugh? Could she be funny? MGM, perhaps sensing a need to refresh her image or simply intrigued by the challenge, decided to find out. They took a gamble and paired her with the master of sophisticated, witty continental comedy, the legendary director Ernst Lubitsch, for a film called Ninotchka. The advertising tagline was as audacious, as headline-grabbing as Garbo Talks had been nearly a decade earlier. This time the posters screamed, "Garbo laughs!" It was an event, and laugh she did. In Ninotchka, Garbo played Nina Ivanovna Yakushova, a stern, rigidly doctrinaire, utterly humorless Soviet envoy sent to decadent capitalist Paris on official business. Her mission? To retrieve 3 wayward comrades who have fallen under the spell of Western luxury. But Paris, and specifically a charming, persistent, man-about-town capitalist playboy named Count Léon Dalgout, gradually begins to thaw her icy communist reserve. Under the intoxicating influence of champagne, frivolous hats, and genuine human connection, the rigid Ninotchka slowly, hilariously transforms. There's a famous scene in a working-class cafe where Léon finally manages, after persistent effort, to make her laugh. It starts as a reluctant chuckle, then blossoms into a full, unrestrained, joyous peal of laughter. The world gasped, then chuckled along, then roared with delight. Garbo's transformation from the severe, slogan-spouting commissar into a woman, experiencing genuine joy, falling in love, and even getting gloriously drunk on champagne, was a revelation. She proved she wasn't just a remote, tragic goddess. She possessed impeccable comedic timing, a surprisingly light touch, and yes, a genuinely infectious, heartwarming laugh. The film, guided by the famous Lubitsch touch of witty innuendo and sophisticated charm, was a massive critical and commercial triumph. It earned Garbo her 3rd Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Ninotchka proved her remarkable versatility and endeared her to audiences in a completely new, more accessible way. She wasn't just admired from afar, she was suddenly relatable, even lovable. Throughout the entire decade of the 1930s, Garbo wasn't merely a movie star, she was a global cultural phenomenon, an undisputed icon. She dictated fashion trends without ever appearing to try. Suddenly, women across the world craved trench coats, slouchy berets, mannish-tailored suits, wide-legged trousers, and that general air of sophisticated, slightly world-weary melancholy. She influenced how women were perceived and portrayed. On screen, demonstrating they could be complex, independent, intelligent, mysterious, and sexually assertive, not just passive romantic interests or damsels in distress waiting for rescue. She was, for much of this period, arguably the biggest and most bankable female star in the world, commanding unprecedented salary demands and, crucially, exerting an increasing degree of creative control over her films, approval of scripts, directors, co-stars, and especially cinematographers, something almost unheard of for an actress, or indeed most actors, at that time. Her carefully guarded private life, or rather the public's perception of its almost complete absence, only fueled the intense fascination. The passionate, ultimately doomed romance with John Gilbert in the late 1920s became enshrined in Hollywood legend, Stories circulated, likely embellished by studio publicists and gossip columnists, about their near marriage, with the most dramatic versions insisting Garbo got cold feet on the wedding day and literally left Gilbert waiting at the altar. The reality, as is so often the case with Garbo, is likely more nuanced, perhaps involving intense pressure, doubts on both sides, and Garbo's fundamental aversion to conventional commitment, rather than a single dramatic jilting incident. Her relationship with her powerful studio boss, the formidable Louis B. Mayer, was famously complex and often fraught with tension. While Mayer undoubtedly respected her immense box office power and international appeal, he was also reportedly driven to distraction by her steadfast refusal to play the Hollywood publicity game, her constant non-negotiable demands for privacy, her periodic threats to return to Sweden, and her incredibly shrewd, steely negotiations come contract renewal time. One exasperated MGM executive was famously quoted as saying that negotiating with Garbo was like dancing on dynamite. She understood her immense value to the studio, and she wasn't afraid to leverage it to protect her artistic integrity and her personal space. Greta Garbo conquered Hollywood not by conforming to its rules, but by brilliantly, stubbornly forcing it to play by hers. Okay, so Garbo's reigning supreme, right? She's the undisputed queen of the MGM lot, the biggest international star, showered with critical acclaim, adored by millions, wielding unprecedented power for an actress, smooth sailing from here on out, surely. A comfortable glide into cinematic immortality? Oh, honey, please. This is Hollywood, a town built on shifting sands, sudden reversals of fortune, and the constant grinding pressure of the studio machine. And Garbo, despite her lofty status and hard-won autonomy, faced a relentless barrage of battles, both internal and external. The biggest, most persistent beast she had to wrestle throughout her career, the very studio system that made her a star, specifically her home studio, the powerful but demanding Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Remember those initial anxieties surrounding her transition to sound? While Garbo Talks ultimately proved a resounding triumph, the process wasn't without its private terrors for her. She was reportedly deeply self-conscious about her pronounced Swedish accent. Would American audiences understand her? Would they find her accent distracting, even comical? Could she truly master the nuances and rhythms of English dialogue to convey the complex emotions her roles required? While she overcame this challenge masterfully on screen, thanks to careful coaching, well-chosen scripts, and her innate musicality, it points to an underlying vulnerability, a persistent insecurity lurking beneath that famously cool, composed exterior. The pressure to be perfect, to never falter, was immense. But the truly spectacular fireworks, the legendary confrontations, invariably occurred during contract negotiations. Garbo, perhaps guided initially by Stiller and later by her own sharp intelligence and steely resolve, quickly understood her immense value to MGM. She wasn't just another actress on their roster. She was their crown jewel, their biggest international draw, a guaranteed profit machine whose films often perform better overseas than even in America. And she was absolutely determined not to let Louis B. Mayer or any other executive forget it for a single moment. As early as 1927, just after the explosive success of Flesh and the Devil had solidified her stardom, she clashed fiercely with the studio. Feeling overworked, underpaid, and dissatisfied with the quality of scripts being offered, she did something almost unthinkable for a star at that time, especially a foreign import. She went on strike. She stopped reporting to work, packed her bags, and let it be known she was seriously considering returning to Sweden for good. MGM, initially inclined to dismiss her demands and call her bluff, quickly realized their multi-million-dollar asset was deadly serious and that losing her would be a financial catastrophe. They blinked first. Garbo returned to the set, triumphant, armed with a significantly improved contract that reportedly boosted her salary substantially and gave her more input on her projects. She executed a similar, even bolder power move in 1932, strategically timing it after the massive success of Grand Hotel and the expiration of her previous contract. This time, the stakes were even higher, and her demands were more audacious. She didn't just want more money, although she certainly demanded that, reportedly becoming the highest-paid woman in America for a period, earning sums that were truly staggering during the depths of the Depression. No. This time, she demanded unprecedented creative control, the contractual right to approve her scripts, her directors, her leading men, and crucially, her cinematographers. She wanted final say over the key elements that shaped her image and her performance. Again, MGM, led by the notoriously tough negotiator Louis B. Mayer, balked at granting such power to an actress. Again, Garbo held absolutely firm, refusing to sign, refusing to work, creating a tense standoff that lasted for months. And again, faced with the prospect of their biggest star sitting idle indefinitely, the studio eventually, grudgingly, caved. Can you even imagine the sheer nerve, the unwavering self-belief it took to basically look Louis B. Mayer, one of the most powerful and feared men in the entire world at that time, squarely in the eye and say, "These are my terms, meet them or I walk." And to win, not once, but repeatedly, absolute queen energy. She wasn't just a beautiful face on the screen. She was a brilliant, ruthless strategist and a shrewd businesswoman who fundamentally refused to be treated like mere studio chattel. Biographer Robert Gottlieb astutely emphasizes that these battles weren't solely about ego or greed. They stemmed from a deep commitment to artistic integrity, a desire to carve out a protected space within the relentless Hollywood machine where she could do her best, most meaningful work, shielded from crass commercialism and studio interference. Beyond the high-stakes contractual battles waged behind closed doors, there was the constant, grinding, soul-eroding pressure of fame itself. Garbo wasn't just famous in the way other stars were famous. She existed on a different plane, treated as Garbo, a quasi-mythical being, a remote goddess onto whom the public projected a potent cocktail of desires, fantasies, and expectations. They saw her as the embodiment of divine aloofness, tragic grandeur, sophisticated sexuality, and perpetual mystery. But Greta Gustafsson, the actual human being living inside that luminous icon, found this relentless, inescapable scrutiny utterly unbearable, deeply violating. She genuinely, profoundly hated the gawking crowds, the flashbulbs, the vapid questions at premieres, the endless interviews, the constant, suffocating demand from the public and the press to be Garbo, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. "I feel like a haunted woman," she once confessed in a moment of vulnerability to a trusted friend, and the phrase feels chillingly authentic, capturing the sense of being perpetually pursued by her own image. Fame wasn't a glittering, joyous party for Garbo. By all accounts, it felt more like a beautifully decorated, suffocating prison with gilded bars. She felt trapped, dissected, objectified by the very phenomenon that had brought her unimaginable wealth, independence, and the adoration of millions. It was a cruel paradox. Her intense aversion to publicity, her almost pathological need to guard her privacy, became legendary, a defining characteristic of her stardom. Trying to get Garbo to attend a movie premiere or a studio function was, by numerous accounts, harder than breaking into Fort Knox. She developed avoidance into a high art form. She would meticulously plan her movements to use back entrances and service elevators. She sometimes wore disguises, large hats, dark glasses, scarves, though, let's be honest, how do you effectively disguise that bone structure, that regal bearing? She simply refused interviews point blank, offering cryptic or dismissive responses. When cornered, this strategy, of course, only poured gasoline on the fire of public fascination. The more she retreated, the more determined the press and the public became to uncover her secrets, to glimpse the real Garbo. It became a relentless, vicious cycle. Was this calculated, a brilliant strategy to deliberately maintain her mystique and keep her market value high, as some cynical observers suspected? Or was it the genuine expression of profound social anxiety, deep-seated shyness, and an authentic, desperate need for personal space and anonymity? Knowing Garbo's complexity, it was most likely a complex, inseparable mixture of both. You can almost hear her sighing, that low, accented voice heavy with weariness. Can't a legendary screen goddess just enjoy her Swedish meatballs and a quiet walk in peace? This fierce desire for control extended logically and powerfully into her creative process on set. Especially after winning those crucial contract battles that granted her unprecedented approval rights, Garbo became deeply, actively involved in the making of her films. She was known to be meticulous, even demanding about scripts, often rejecting projects she felt were unsuitable, poorly written, or didn't resonate with her sensibilities. She developed strong working relationships with a handful of directors she trusted implicitly. Talented craftsmen like Clarence Brown, George Cukor, and Ruben Mamoulian. She felt safe with them, able to explore the emotional depths her roles required, and most crucially, she formed an almost symbiotic, visually defining partnership with her favorite cinematographer, William H. Daniels. Daniels shot nearly all of her MGM talkies, from Anna Christie onwards, and together they meticulously developed that signature Garbo lighting, a soft, ethereal, often key light dominant style that sculpted her extraordinary face like a Renaissance portrait, emphasizing those incredible eyes and cheekbones while minimizing any feature she considered less flattering. She wasn't just passively lit by Daniels. She understood the camera, the lenses, the subtle effects of light and shadow, arguably better than many technicians on the crew. Stories abound, recounted by co-stars and crew members, of Garbo quietly but firmly directing the lighting setup, knowing exactly how she needed to be photographed to achieve that luminous, almost otherworldly effect that became her trademark. Mr. Daniels, one can imagine her murmuring in that low, precisely accented voice. A little softer on the key light, yeah? The soul does not wish to be interrogated by harsh shadows. Okay, maybe she didn't phrase it exactly like that, but the sentiment captures her active participation. She wasn't merely a passive mannequin draped in Adrian gowns. She was an active, knowledgeable co-creator of her own indelible cinematic image. But even goddesses, especially goddesses operating within the fickle, often treacherous currents of Hollywood, can stumble. Even Garbo, with all her power and mystique, wasn't immune to missteps. In 1941, MGM, perhaps misguidedly hoping to recapture the sparkling comedic magic of Ninotchka, cast her in another comedy, this one directed by George Cukor, titled Two-Faced Woman. The studio's apparent goal was to further humanize Garbo, to make her seem more accessible, more American, less of the remote European enigma. The plot involved her playing dual roles, a sophisticated wife pretending to be her own fictitious, wildly flirtatious twin sister to win back her straying husband. She was required to shed her sophisticated image, wear revealing outfits, engage in slapstick, even perform a vigorously athletic jitterbug dance sequence. The result? An unmitigated critical and commercial disaster. Critics were baffled, even horrified, finding the premise ridiculous and the execution clumsy. Audiences were confused, unsure what to make of this strange, almost desperate attempt to remold their idol into something she clearly wasn't. Worse still, the film ran afoul of the powerful Legion of Decency and other censorship groups who deemed its themes of marital infidelity and suggestive situations morally objectionable, leading to frantic cuts and reshoots by the studio that only made the film more incoherent. And Garbo herself? By all accounts, she absolutely loathed the film, her performance, and the entire experience. It represented everything she disliked about Hollywood's tendency towards superficiality and forced joviality. It tried far too hard to force her into a conventional, peppy American mold, and audiences collectively responded with a resounding, "Nah, we're good. Give us back the real Garbo or no Garbo at all." The film's humiliating failure was a major public blow to her prestige and reportedly to her already fragile morale. And, as history would bear out, it proved to be the final, decisive straw. The undisputed queen of Hollywood, weary beyond measure of the relentless battles, bruised professionally and personally by this embarrassing flop, and perhaps intuitively sensing a fundamental shift in cinematic tastes and the global mood as World War II engulfed the world, decided quietly but irrevocably that it was time to take her final bow. The curtain was coming down on her screen career, but her profound influence, that was far from over. So what exactly was it that made Garbo Garbo? What constituted that unique, almost alchemical magic she brought to the silver screen? And how did her presence fundamentally change the game for Hollywood and the very nature of stardom? It boils down to a combination of a revolutionary acting style, an inimitable aura, and a stubborn, almost defiant refusal to compromise that collectively reshaped the landscape of cinema and celebrity. First, and perhaps most importantly, let's delve deeper into her acting style. In an era that often favored grand theatrical gestures, overt emoting, and clearly signaled emotions, especially carrying over from the necessary exaggerations of silent film, Garbo emerged as a pioneer, perhaps the pioneer of cinematic minimalism and psychological realism. She possessed an uncanny understanding of the intimate power of the close-up, recognizing that the camera lens wasn't just observing, but actively probing, capable of capturing the most fleeting thoughts and subtle shifts in inner feeling. She could convey more profound emotion with a slight, almost imperceptible narrowing of her extraordinary eyes, a subtle downturn of her famous lips, a momentary hesitation, or a prolonged, piercing, soul-searching gaze than most actors of her time could achieve with pages of dialogue or frantic scenery-chewing physicality. Remember that astonishing final shot of Queen Christina? That is the absolute epitome of her technique. It wasn't about doing nothing, it was about thinking and feeling with such intensity that the inner state registered powerfully on her incredibly expressive face. It was acting that originated from deep within, a subterranean wellspring of internal emotion that flickered across her features like shifting light on water. As the astute critic Kenneth Tynan so memorably described it, her face was nothing less than a map of the human heart, charting its complex territories of sorrow, longing, and resilience. It wasn't about doing less. It was about being more, allowing the camera to capture the very genesis of a thought, the nascent stirring of a feeling, before it even fully coalesced into a conventional expression. It was pure, unadulterated minimalist magic. This profound subtlety was nothing short of revolutionary in the context of 1930s Hollywood. She made introspection look not just acceptable, but compelling, even incredibly cool and glamorous. She demonstrated conclusively that stillness on screen could be far more captivating, more magnetic than frantic histrionics. She proved that less could indeed be infinitely more. This had a massive, albeit sometimes subtle, impact on the generations of actors who followed her. She elevated the art of screen acting, revealing its potential for deep psychological exploration. and profound emotional nuance, particularly during the crucial transition period as cinema embraced the complexities of sound. Her own resounding success with spoken dialogue, despite her noticeable Swedish accent, further proved her point. How you spoke, the underlying emotion, the weight and rhythm carried within the words, mattered far more than perfect, accent-free diction. That voice, when it finally arrived on the soundtrack, wasn't just recorded sound. It was, as we've noted, akin to velvet dipped in whiskey, smooth, deep, resonant, carrying layers of unspoken history and weary wisdom, and utterly, dangerously intoxicating. Beyond the groundbreaking acting technique, there was the image, the aura, the inescapable Garbo mystique. She radiated a complex, alluring combination of world weariness, sharp intelligence, smoldering sensuality, and an almost glacial, untouchable glamour. She was emphatically not the relatable girl next door. She was the enigmatic goddess visiting Earth from another far more interesting, possibly much sadder planet. This carefully cultivated distance, this sense of profound otherness, made her endlessly, obsessively fascinating to the public. In a town built on manufactured personalities, relentless publicity stunts, and forced bonhomie, her palpable reserve, her seeming indifference to fame, felt startlingly authentic, almost noble, and incredibly powerful. She made melancholy chic, sophisticated, almost desirable. She proved conclusively that you didn't need a permanent, plastered-on grin or a bubbly, effervescent personality to become the biggest star in the world. Her personal style, both as reflected in her iconic film costumes designed by the brilliant Adrian and in her own off-screen choices, became hugely influential, rippling through fashion for decades. She popularized androgynous looks long before they became mainstream. The impeccably tailored trousers, the crisp men's style shirts, those signature wide-shouldered trench coats, the casually tilted slouch hats and berets. These weren't just clothes. They were statements of independence and confidence, compared to the heavily painted, elaborately coiffed faces common among starlets of the time. Garbo often favored a more restrained, natural makeup look, allowing her extraordinary bone structure and those incredibly expressive features to do the heavy lifting. She wasn't chasing trends, she was the trend. She embodied a kind of effortless, inherent European sophistication and understated elegance that Hollywood studios desperately tried and often failed to replicate in other actresses. Suddenly, seemingly every woman wanted to cultivate an air of mystery, to look pensively into the middle distance and invest in a really great, empowering coat. And let's not, under any circumstances, forget her significant impact on the power dynamics of the industry itself. Garbo didn't just act within the studio system, she actively challenged and, to a degree, reshaped it. She didn't just perform, she reigned. Her successful, often hard-fought contract battles with mighty MGM, demanding enormous salaries and unprecedented levels of creative control, set crucial precedents for star power. She demonstrated unequivocally that a sufficiently valuable asset could indeed leverage their box office clout against the monolithic studio structure. She refused to be merely an employee, insisting on being treated as a partner, albeit often a reluctant, demanding, and notoriously difficult one. In doing so, she subtly but significantly shifted the power dynamic between star and studio, paving the way for future generations of actors, male and female, to demand more autonomy, respect, and artistic input in their careers. Think about the sheer audacity of it. She essentially told the biggest, most powerful corporation in her global industry, repeatedly, "You need me far more than I need you," and then had the box office receipts to prove it. That required not just talent, but incredible courage, unwavering self-belief, and nerves of absolute steel. She also, perhaps inadvertently, created the enduring blueprint for the mysterious star. Her steadfast refusal to engage with the intrusive machinery of the press, her almost obsessive guarding of her private life, while likely stemming from genuine personal inclination and deep-seated shyness, became an intrinsic, defining part of her incredibly potent brand. It proved counterintuitively that you didn't need to spill your guts in fan magazines, attend every glitzy industry party, or constantly feed the publicity beast to maintain public fascination and sell movie tickets. In Garbo's case, her silence, her withholding, her elusiveness spoke volumes more than any carefully crafted press release ever could. She demonstrated to Hollywood and to the world that profound allure could be found not just in revelation, but in strategic, enigmatic withholding. So what constituted her unique, enduring style? It was a complex tapestry woven from threads of emotional authenticity, the revolutionary power of subtlety in performance, the magnetic allure of mystery, and the sheer, unyielding courage to demand control over her art, her image, and her life. Her contribution to cinema wasn't just a catalogue of brilliant, unforgettable performances. It was fundamentally redefining what a movie star could be: powerful, independent, intellectually curious, emotionally complex, and utterly, unapologetically herself. Her entire meticulously crafted on-screen persona, that luminous yet remote mystique, can perhaps be seen as yet another layer in her lifelong, deeply personal quest for solitude. A way of hiding in plain sight, adored from a distance by millions, yet remaining, in her essence, fundamentally untouchable. The melancholy queen depicted so powerfully on screen, particularly in roles like Queen Christina, seemed to mirror, perhaps even stem from, the private woman who desperately yearned for a world away from the clamor and demands of global fame. She left an indelible, multifaceted mark, not just on the history of film, but on the very concept and culture of celebrity itself. But what happened after she walked away, seemingly at the height of her powers? After the critical drubbing and personal disappointment of Two-Faced Woman in 1941, Greta Garbo, still arguably the most famous woman in the world, still relatively young and breathtakingly beautiful at 36, did the truly unthinkable. She retired. She didn't issue a press release announcing a hiatus. She didn't embark on a sentimental farewell tour. She just stopped, abruptly, cold turkey. The cameras stopped rolling for her, and she never allowed them to start again. Hollywood was utterly stunned. The global public was baffled, disbelieving. It was the ultimate vanishing act, the commencement of a self-imposed seclusion that would stretch for nearly half a century and become in itself almost as legendary, as mythologized, as her extraordinary film career. But what was truly transpiring behind that formidable velvet curtain of privacy she so fiercely, so successfully guarded for the rest of her long life? So, the year is 1941. The world is engulfed in war. Two-Faced Woman, Garbo's attempt at screwball. Comedy bombs spectacularly. Garbo, by all accounts, hates the film and the experience, feeling artistically compromised and perhaps sensing the changing winds of Hollywood. And so, Greta Garbo, the enigmatic Swedish sphinx, the highest-paid actress, the global icon, does the thing no one expected. She quits. At the age of 36, an age when many actresses are just hitting their peak stride, she simply walks away from the fame, the fortune, the adoration, the entire glittering machinery of movie making. She doesn't fade gracefully. She doesn't announce a strategic retreat. She just stops completely, vanishes from the screen. Hollywood executives were dumbfounded, scrambling to understand. The public was bewildered, refusing to believe it was permanent. It was the ultimate, most dramatic vanishing act in Hollywood history, the beginning of a profound seclusion that would last for nearly 50 years and become inevitably as much a part of her legend as her unforgettable screen performances. But what was really going on behind that impenetrable velvet curtain of privacy she so obsessively, so successfully guarded? Garbo's love life, both during her reign in Hollywood and in the long decades that followed, was perpetually shrouded in mystery and fueled by rampant speculation. Precisely because she revealed so incredibly little herself, rumors, gossip, and outright fabrications flourished, filling the void left by her silence. The most famous, most dissected, and most legendary of her relationships, of course, was the passionate, tumultuous, and ultimately doomed affair with her charismatic flesh and the devil co-star John Gilbert back in the late 1920s. He was Hollywood's reigning great lover, the swashbuckling matinee idol. She was the exotic, mysterious import. Their on-screen chemistry, as we've established, was practically radioactive. Off-screen, according to numerous contemporary accounts and later biographies, they were deeply, wildly in love, inseparable, for a significant period. Gilbert, by all reports, was utterly head over heels, completely smitten, showering her with affection and proposing marriage repeatedly. Then came the infamous story of the almost wedding, a piece of Hollywood lore that has persisted for nearly a century. The most dramatic version goes like this. Gilbert, desperate to finally make Garbo his wife, finally extracts a reluctant agreement from her. The wedding is planned, the guests are invited, Gilbert is waiting nervously at the altar. And Garbo is a no-show, stood up at the altar, or maybe she just locked herself in the bathroom and refused to come out. It's a fantastically dramatic anecdote, perfectly painting Garbo as the ultimate unknowable ice queen, terrified of commitment, casually breaking the heart of Hollywood's leading man. But how true is this specific theatrical scenario? Like most things concerning Garbo's private life, the precise details remain frustratingly hazy, likely obscured by time, embellishment, and conflicting accounts. Meticulous biographers like Barry Paris suggest that while there were certainly intense discussions about marriage, perhaps even tentative plans made, the dramatic altar jilting incident is probably a significant exaggeration, likely fueled by studio publicity needs, Gilbert's own later bitterness, and the public's insatiable appetite for melodrama. What seems indisputably clear is that while the passion between them was undeniably real and intense, Garbo ultimately could not or would not commit to that kind of traditional, legally binding partnership. Perhaps the very thought of being formally tied down, of surrendering even a fraction of her fiercely guarded independence, was simply intolerable to her deeply ingrained nature. Poor Gilbert was reportedly devastated, his pride wounded, his heart broken. Their intense, fiery connection eventually flickered and faded, although some accounts suggest a lingering, complex affection and occasional contact remained between them in later years. Then there exists the equally fascinating, perhaps even more complex and hotly debated relationship with the writer, poet, and socialite Mercedes de Acosta. De Acosta was a flamboyant, cigar-smoking, trouser-wearing figure in her own right, known for her aristocratic Spanish background, her artistic pursuits, and her well-documented intimate relationships with prominent, often married women, including the legendary dancer Isadora Duncan and, perhaps most notoriously, Garbo's supposed screen rival, Marlene Dietrich. De Acosta and Garbo first met in Hollywood in the early 1930s, introduced by mutual friends, and quickly formed an intense, passionate, albeit highly volatile and intermittent bond that would endure in various forms for nearly 30 years. The nature of this relationship remains a subject of intense speculation. In her controversial tell-all 1960 memoir, Here Lies the Heart, De Acosta painted a vivid picture of what she portrayed as a profound, spiritually charged, and undeniably romantic and physical love affair with Garbo. She described secret rendezvous, passionate declarations, and shared emotional intimacy. Most damningly, in Garbo's eyes, D'Acosta included excerpts from Garbo's own deeply personal letters to her, a profound betrayal of trust for the intensely private star. Garbo, predictably, was absolutely furious when the book was published. She immediately and permanently cut off all contact with D'Acosta, refusing to ever speak to her or about her again. So, was it a full-blown lesbian affair, as D'Acosta claimed and as many have since assumed? Or was it perhaps a deeply intense, emotionally dependent but ultimately platonic friendship that the more flamboyant and possessive D'Acosta later romanticized or deliberately misrepresented in her memoirs? Garbo, true to form, maintained an absolute, impenetrable silence on the matter for the rest of her life. D'Acosta's claims, often viewed as self-serving or unreliable by Garbo loyalists, have been debated by biographers ever since. Some researchers, citing the passionate tone of surviving letters and D'Acosta's known history, believe a physical relationship almost certainly occurred, at least for a time. Others argue it was a complex, romantic friendship, common in earlier eras that D'Acosta, perhaps seeking reflected glory, chose to frame in more sensational terms. The absolute truth? As usual with Garbo's inner life, it remains tantalizingly elusive, locked away tighter than Fort Knox, likely buried deep within a Swedish bank vault or turned to ash in an incinerator long ago. What we can say with certainty is that Mercedes D'Acosta was one of the very few people who seemed to penetrate Garbo's carefully constructed emotional defenses, who shared a period of intense intimacy with her, however defined, and whose later public revelations caused Garbo profound distress and confirmed her deep distrust of letting anyone get too close. Beyond these intense, widely speculated upon relationships, Garbo cultivated and fiercely protected a very small, extremely tight-knit circle of trusted friends, individuals who offered companionship, loyalty, and crucially discretion. Key among these during her Hollywood years was Salka Viertel, a fellow European émigré, a talented screenwriter and actress who became one of Garbo's closest, most enduring confidants. Viertel's home in Santa Monica became a haven for European intellectuals and artists fleeing Nazism, a salon where Garbo could sometimes be found, engaging in serious conversation away from the Hollywood glitz. Viertel understood Garbo's cultural background, her artistic temperament, her intellectual curiosity, and perhaps most importantly, her profound disdain for the perceived phoniness and superficiality of much of the film colony. Their friendship provided Garbo with intellectual stimulation and a crucial link to her European roots. Later, during her long retirement years in New York, her most constant companion, advisor, and gatekeeper became George Schley, a dapper, sophisticated Russian-born businessman who was married to the elegant fashion designer Valentina. From the mid-1940s until Schley's sudden death in 1964, he and Garbo were almost inseparable. He managed many of her financial affairs, traveled extensively with her, accompanied her on her daily walks, and acted as a protective buffer against the outside world. Their relationship was, inevitably, another source of endless speculation and gossip. Were they lovers, conducting a discreet, long-term affair under the nose of Schley's wife? Or were they simply incredibly close platonic friends, soulmates, who found solace and companionship in each other's company? Valentina once famously quipped, "He married me, she married him." Again, Garbo offered no public clarification, maintaining her silence. After Schley's death, Garbo was reportedly devastated, losing not only her closest companion, but also her primary link to the world. Other friends included the writer Erich Maria Remarque for a time, and later in life, members of the Rothschild family and her loyal housekeeper, Claire Koga. These relationships, both the intense, debated ones and the long-term friendships, highlight key, often contradictory aspects of Garbo's complex personality. She clearly craved deep connection, intellectual companionship, and loyalty, yet seemed simultaneously terrified of emotional vulnerability, possessiveness, or losing control. Friends consistently described her in private as incredibly loyal, possessing a wicked, dry sense of humor, highly intelligent, insightful, and capable of moments of great warmth, generosity, and genuine fun. But she could also be notoriously moody, demanding, possessive of her friends' time and attention, prone to bouts of melancholy silence, and capable of sudden, inexplicable emotional withdrawals, disappearing back behind her protective wall for days or weeks without explanation. One friend, quoted anonymously in Karen Swenson's biography, aptly summed up the experience. "You always knew where you stood with Greta, which was usually slightly at arm's length, even when she was being her most charming. Her intimate life, viewed from the outside, seems less like a series of torrid Hollywood romances or cozy friendships, and more like an intricate, cryptic crossword puzzle, filled with intriguing clues, tantalizing possibilities, but very few definitively confirmed answers, all wrapped in a persistent, lingering aura of profound mystery." The public image projected was one of an untouchable screen goddess, radiating glacial allure. The private reality was likely far more complicated, perhaps just a deeply introverted, profoundly sensitive woman who desperately wanted companionship, but only on her own very specific, carefully controlled, and fiercely guarded terms. Retiring from the relentless demands of the movie screen in 1941 didn't magically grant Greta Garbo the peaceful anonymity she craved. If anything, her deliberate withdrawal from public life only intensified the media's obsession and the public's insatiable curiosity. Her seclusion became her new role, her new performance. But this wasn't some cleverly calculated publicity stunt designed to maintain her mystique, as some cynics suggested. By all credible accounts, her retreat stemmed from profound, deeply rooted personal struggles, the accumulated psychic weight of having worn that heavy, suffocating crown of global fame for nearly 2 decades. Garbo was, by her very nature, an intensely private, deeply shy individual who, through a strange twist of fate and talent, found herself thrust into the most glaringly public, intensely scrutinized profession imaginable. It was a fundamental mismatch between personality and profession. Friends, confidants, and meticulous biographers consistently describe her lifelong battles with what she herself often referred to simply as melancholy, recurring periods of deep sadness, lethargy, profound pessimism, and social withdrawal that sound unmistakably like clinical depression. She seemed to wrestle constantly with crippling insecurity and self-doubt, lurking just beneath the confident, poised image projected on screen. "I am a haunted woman," she once confessed with chilling candor to a friend, and the phrase resonates, with a painful authenticity, capturing a sense of being perpetually pursued, perhaps by her own fame, her own past, or her own inner demons. Fame wasn't a glittering reward or an enjoyable party for Garbo. It felt increasingly like a suffocating cage, a beautifully decorated prison with gilded bars. She felt trapped, dissected, objectified, relentlessly scrutinized by the very image that had brought her unimaginable wealth, independence, and the adoration of millions. It was the ultimate Faustian bargain, and the price for her sensitive soul was becoming unbearable. Just try to imagine the intense internal conflict, the psychological dissonance she must have experienced daily. There's Greta Lovisa Gustafsson, the working-class girl from the back streets of Stockholm, who likely never stopped feeling on some fundamental level like an outsider, an imposter in the glamorous world she inhabited. And then there's Garbo, the global icon, the ethereal, almost alien being conjured by the wizards at MGM, worshipped by millions who knew nothing of the real woman. Being forced to live inside that persona, to constantly measure up to that impossible ideal, must have created an identity crisis of epic proportions, worthy of its own tragic opera. Who am I, really? Am I the shy, serious girl who just wants to be left alone with her thoughts? Or am I the powerful, commanding screen presence whose gaze can stop hearts? This profound duality, this internal tug-of-war between her innate self and her public construction, seems to have been a constant source of anxiety and tension throughout her adult life. "There are days," she confided heartbreakingly to a friend, "during her peak years, when I feel that I am not wanted." This, from arguably one of the most desired, most sought-after women on the entire planet at the time, reveals the depth of her insecurity and alienation. She battled her own formidable demons daily, and honestly, that relentless internal struggle sounds far more intense, far more exhausting than any overwrought melodrama she ever starred in on screen. Her powerful need for solitude, for time, away from people and demands, seemed to deepen over the years, bordering on what some observers speculated might be genuine social anxiety or even a mild form of agoraphobia, a fear of crowds and public places. While she managed, through sheer willpower and professional necessity, to navigate the often chaotic world of Hollywood during her career, retirement finally granted her the freedom to indulge this profound need for isolation more fully, to construct a life largely lived outside the public gaze. But the perennial unanswerable question remains: was it true peace she finally found in that carefully curated solitude, or was it merely a different kind of confinement, a lonely echo chamber for her melancholic thoughts? Did escaping the relentless scrutiny of the public eye genuinely alleviate the crushing pressure, or did it simply leave her more alone, adrift with the haunted woman she described herself as being? It's the million-dollar question, the central enigma that hangs over the long, quiet decades of her later years. As she grew older, removed from the flattering lights and expert makeup of the film studio, Garbo became even more fiercely determined to control her image, primarily by preventing any new images from being captured at all. She famously, almost pathologically, avoided cameras like the plague. Paparazzi sightings became the stuff of urban legend, treated with the breathless excitement of spotting a UFO over Central Park by the New York press and tabloid photographers who stalked her relentlessly. Her look, in these later years, became a distinct uniform of self-preservation, a deliberate exercise in attempting anonymity, large, dark sunglasses worn indoors and out regardless of the weather, scarves draped strategically, comfortable, sensible walking shoes suited for covering miles of city pavement, and often wide-brimmed hats pulled down low to obscure her still recognizable features. She was undeniably aging, naturally and seemingly without surgical intervention, but her goal was to age as much as possible invisibly. She seemed desperate to be remembered only as she appeared on screen, eternally youthful, impossibly glamorous, frozen in the luminous perfection of her cinematic prime. The mundane reality of aging, the prospect of being seen by strangers as ordinary, flawed, or simply older, appeared intolerable to her. One biographer insightfully noted that she seemed unable or unwilling to reconcile the aging woman reflected in her mirror with the eternally captivating goddess preserved forever on celluloid. Yet behind the obsessive quest for privacy, the elaborate maneuvers to avoid detection, there existed a real woman endeavoring to live a life, albeit a highly unconventional one. One of her most defining and perhaps most relatable habits during her long retirement was walking. She walked for miles, literally miles, almost every single day, for hours on end. Rain or shine, she would stride purposefully, often alone, crisscrossing the streets of Manhattan, exploring neighborhoods from the gritty Bowery to the posh Upper East Side, frequently ending up in the relative sanctuary of Central Park. Walking, She apparently remarked to a friend, "is my only exercise, my only entertainment." It seems to have been her primary way of engaging with the world while maintaining her distance, a method for observing the bustling theater of New York life. From the anonymous position of a pedestrian, remaining an unseen spectator rather than the star attraction, she also cultivated, with quiet passion and considerable discernment, a deep love for fine art. Her spacious New York apartment overlooking the East River was, by the few accounts of those allowed inside, filled with a museum-quality collection of paintings, particularly favoring Impressionist and modern European masters like Renoir, Bonnard, Sisley, and Kandinsky, along with some striking works by Jolensky. Collecting art became a private solace, a deeply personal joy, a way to surround herself with enduring beauty, color, and meaning that made no emotional demands upon her. And despite her glamorous past and immense wealth, friends who knew her in these later years consistently reported that she seemed to genuinely enjoy simple domestic pleasures, cooking traditional Swedish dishes, tending a small collection of plants on her balcony, reading voraciously across a wide range of subjects and engaging in intense, often witty, sometimes deeply philosophical conversations with the very few individuals admitted into her trusted inner circle. She owned priceless works of art and had once commanded the attention of the entire world, yet seemed happiest, most herself, when wandering anonymously through the city streets or quietly contemplating the brushstrokes of a Renoir in the privacy of her own home. The ultimate irony, perhaps? The woman who became the global symbol of unattainable glamour seemed to find genuine solace only in utter simplicity, anonymity, and carefully guarded seclusion. Garbo's retirement itself, the act of walking away in 1941, stands as the single, most significant personal event defining the entire second half of her long life. It wasn't a gradual diminuendo, a slow fade out as her popularity waned. It was a sharp, deliberate, decisive slamming of the door on her film career, executed while she was still at the absolute peak of her fame and bankability. At just 36 years old, an age when many actresses are entering their richest, most complex performing years, she simply walked away. She turned her back on multi-million-dollar contract offers, on the continued adoration of millions of fans worldwide, on the very profession she had seemingly dreamed of pursuing since she was a poor girl in Stockholm. Why? The humiliating failure of Two-Faced Woman was certainly a significant catalyst, a painful confirmation of her fears about Hollywood's artistic limitations and changing tastes. The grim backdrop of World War II undoubtedly played a role as well, profoundly shifting the global mood and perhaps making her brand of sophisticated European glamour feel less relevant or appropriate for a time. But fundamentally, underlying all these external factors, it seems she was simply profoundly done. Done with the relentless pressure, done with the compromises demanded by the studio, done with the suffocating burden of constantly being Garbo. "I had made enough faces," she reportedly quipped, with characteristic dryness and understatement, many years later when asked about her decision. After officially retiring, she didn't just disappear into thin air. She strategically, meticulously relocated the center of her life away from the blinding glare of Hollywood. While she initially spent time traveling, staying with friends, and contemplating potential properties, she eventually settled in the mid-1940s into a spacious, elegant, 7-room apartment in the Campanile, a highly exclusive, discreet cooperative building located at 450 East 52nd Street in Manhattan, affording stunning, protected views overlooking the East River. This apartment became her sanctuary, her primary residence, her carefully guarded fortress of solitude for nearly 4 decades, until her death. She guarded its privacy with legendary ferocity, Very few people were ever invited inside its walls, and those who were described a place of quiet, understated elegance, filled with her impressive art collection, comfortable, unpretentious furniture, and notably, windows strategically positioned and perhaps curtained to maximize privacy and minimize any possibility of being observed from neighboring buildings or the river. She became, during these years, the ultimate New York urban legend. Everyone knew of the mysterious Greta Garbo residing in quiet splendor at the Campanile, but almost no one outside her tiny circle actually knew her or had ever crossed her threshold. The truly fascinating aspect of her retirement is that Hollywood, and indeed filmmakers around the world, never truly gave up hope of luring her back to the screen. For years, even decades, lucrative and artistically tempting offers continued to pour in. Producers, renowned directors, even former co-stars tried repeatedly to coax her out of her self-imposed exile. They offered her fortunes that dwarfed her already substantial wealth. They commissioned scripts tailored specifically to her unique talents and persona. They dangled potentially spectacular comeback roles before her, parts like the aging ballerina, Grusinskaya in Powell, and Pressburger's The Red Shoes, or perhaps most tantalizingly, the faded, delusional silent screen star Norma Desmond in Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard. The great Italian director Federico Fellini reportedly dreamed of casting her. Even roles requiring minimal screen time, perhaps just a cameo appearance, were proposed. Her answer, consistently, eventually, was always no. Sometimes, tantalizingly, she would express initial interest, engage in preliminary discussions, perhaps even meet with a director or producer, sparking hopeful rumors. But inevitably, invariably, she would pull back at the last minute, overcome by her anxieties, her inertia, or simply her fundamental unwillingness to step back into the harsh, unforgiving glare of the spotlight. The thought of the cameras, the costumes, the makeup, the crews, the publicity, the relentless scrutiny, it was ultimately simply too much to bear. Her silence, her polite but firm refusals became louder, more definitive, and more legendary than any spoken no. Her elusiveness, during her New York years, became an integral part of the city's fabric and folklore. Garbo sightings were a kind of persistent low-level sport for dedicated New Yorkers, celebrity hounds, and visiting tourists armed with cameras. Saw Garbo buying celery at the Gristades market today, someone might breathlessly report in a gossip column or to friends, recounting the mundane event with the hushed awe usually reserved for spotting Bigfoot riding the Loch Ness Monster down Fifth Avenue. She developed predictable routines, her daily multi-mile walks, often following similar routes through Central Park or along the East River. Visits to specific art galleries or antique shops, usually during off-peak hours, occasional quiet lunches, or dinners with her few trusted friends. But she always maintained that unmistakable aura of untouchability, shielded behind the ubiquitous dark sunglasses and her often brisk, purposeful pace, discouraging any attempts at interaction. She essentially invented the concept of ghosting your entire career and public life, decades before the term became commonplace in the digital age. So, what did she actually do all day for almost 50 years in that self-created bubble of privacy? Beyond the epic daily walks and the quiet contemplation of her art collection, she traveled extensively, though always discreetly, often under assumed names or with minimal fanfare, usually accompanied by George Schley or other close companions. She favored quiet, luxurious European destinations, Switzerland, the French Riviera, Italy, where she could potentially blend in more easily than in America. She maintained her very small, carefully vetted circle of friends, engaging in intense, often intellectually stimulating conversations and enjoying simple private meals. She read voraciously, keeping up with world events, literature and art, Guided by astute advisors like Schlee, she managed her considerable investments shrewdly, ensuring her continued financial independence and security, which was paramount to her. It wasn't a life filled with dramatic public events or headline-grabbing activities, but rather a meticulously curated, deliberately quiet existence focused almost entirely on maintaining her peace, preserving her anonymity, and avoiding intrusion at all costs. Her entire post-retirement life, therefore, became the ultimate, unwavering expression of that central theme we identified early on: the relentless, lifelong quest for solitude. She finally, definitively achieved the profound privacy she had seemingly craved since those overwhelming early days in Hollywood. She escaped the suffocating, demanding persona of Garbo that she felt had trapped her for so long. She controlled her environment, her interactions, her schedule, her image. But the persistent, unanswerable question inevitably lingers. Did she truly find happiness, contentment, or genuine peace in that carefully constructed, fiercely guarded quiet? Or did the melancholy, the profound shyness, the haunted woman she had once described herself as being, remain her constant, inescapable companion, echoing silently within the elegant but perhaps lonely rooms of the Campanile? We can only speculate, piecing together fragments from the accounts of those few who knew her. What remains undeniably clear is that her extraordinary vanishing act became the final, most enigmatic, and perhaps most defining chapter in a life lived utterly, stubbornly, and courageously on her own terms. Greta Garbo lived out her secluded, intensely private life in her New York sanctuary until her death from pneumonia and renal failure on April 15, 1990, at the age of 84. She had spent nearly half a century deliberately removed from the cameras, the interviews, the entire apparatus of fame, shrouded in a self-imposed seclusion that only amplified her legend. But true legends, especially those forged in the crucible of Hollywood's golden age, don't simply vanish into thin air upon their mortal departure. Garbo's certainly didn't. Her image, frozen in time yet eternally potent, her groundbreaking work, still studied and admired, and the sheer enigmatic force of her unique personality left an indelible, enduring mark on the art of cinema, the evolution of fashion, and our very understanding of the complex, often contradictory nature of modern celebrity. So, what constitutes the lasting, multifaceted legacy of the Swedish Sphinx, the woman who famously just wanted to be left alone? First and foremost, Garbo fundamentally redefined the art of screen acting. Her pioneering minimalist style, her astonishing ability to convey vast oceans of complex emotion with the slightest gesture, the most subtle glance, raised the bar for performers everywhere, demonstrating the profound power of interiority and stillness on camera. She proved that cinematic impact didn't have to shout from the rooftops. It could whisper devastatingly, it could gaze penetratingly, it could simply, powerfully be. She masterfully bridged the challenging gap between the broader expressiveness required for silent film and the nuanced psychological realism demanded by the arrival of sound, influencing countless actors who followed in her wake, from the stars of Hollywood's golden age who observed her technique firsthand, right down to performers working today. They might not consciously imitate her distinctive mannerisms, but the path she courageously forged towards greater psychological depth, emotional subtlety, and the power of understated performance benefited the entire art form immeasurably. Then, of course, there's the indelible impact on fashion. Oh, the timeless fashion! Garbo wasn't merely dressed in costumes for her roles. She inhabited clothes with an innate authority, a sense of style, and a modern sensibility that resonated deeply with audiences and designers alike, and continues to echo today. That effortlessly chic, often androgynous aesthetic she popularized The impeccably tailored trousers worn with slouchy confidence, the crisp men's-style shirts adopted long before it was commonplace for women, the ubiquitous, wide-shouldered trench coat that became practically synonymous with her name. The casually tilted slouch hats and berets all became instant classics, elements of the eternally cool, sophisticated style that continues to be endlessly referenced and recycled by fashion designers and stylists decades later. She made looking effortlessly elegant, perhaps while simultaneously contemplating the vast emptiness of existence, seem like the ultimate aspirational goal. Her influence extends far beyond specific garments. It's about projecting an attitude, a blend of confidence, independence, mystery, and understated glamour, a way of inhabiting clothes that felt both utterly timeless and startlingly modern for her era. Culturally, Garbo transcended the label of movie star to become something far more resonant, a genuine archetype, a cultural touchstone. The very adjective Garbo-esque entered the English lexicon, immediately conjuring a specific image, a certain kind of mysterious, aloof, perhaps, melancholic or enigmatic beauty, intelligence and self-possession. She came to represent female independence, intellectual depth, sexual confidence, and a powerful refusal to conform to conventional expectations, long before those qualities were widely celebrated or even considered acceptable in prominent female public figures. She proved spectacularly that a woman didn't need to be perpetually bubbly, eagerly accessible, or conventionally likable to be adored, admired, and incredibly successful. Indeed, her famous silence, her strategic elusiveness, became her most potent and enduring statement. It created a mystique so powerful that decades of tell-all celebrity interviews, relentless social media saturation, and the rise of reality TV culture still haven't managed to entirely extinguish its allure from our collective cultural memory. She also demonstrated, repeatedly and effectively, the profound power of saying no. No to unwanted, intrusive publicity. No to poorly written or unsuitable scripts that compromised her artistic standards. No to demands from the studio or the public that violated her personal boundaries or her sense of integrity. In an industry often built on compromise, compliance, and the desperate need for approval, her stubborn, unwavering integrity, her insistence on defining her own terms, stands out as truly remarkable. She subtly but significantly changed the dynamics within Hollywood, proving that extraordinary talent, combined with unwavering resolve, could indeed challenge the monolithic power structure, perhaps without even consciously setting out to wage a revolution, but simply by being relentlessly, unapologetically, uniquely herself. Her greatest, most enduring role, therefore, might not have been the tragic Marguerite Gautier in Camille, or the complex Queen Christina. Her greatest, most challenging, and ultimately most successful performance might have been the creation and lifelong maintenance of the persona known as Greta Garbo, the elusive, untouchable icon who kept the entire world guessing for decades. That carefully guarded persona, the fascinating interplay between the luminous, idealized image projected onto the screen and the fiercely private, complex woman living off-screen, is the core of her enduring legacy. The famous line she delivered, with such haunting weariness in Grand Hotel, "I want to be alone," wasn't just memorable movie dialogue. It became the poignant, resonant refrain of her own life's central quest. The quest for solitude, for peace, for a space away from the relentless, consuming gaze of the world. It was a quest that profoundly shaped both her career choices and her eventual decision to embrace nearly 50 years of quiet retirement. She achieved unprecedented global fame, then deliberately, decisively traded it all for anonymity, leaving behind a relatively small but exceptionally potent body of cinematic work and a personal legend so enigmatic that it continues to captivate, fascinate and mystify us to this day. Even during her long decades of self-imposed seclusion, the world certainly never forgot Greta Garbo. The accolades and honors continued to accrue, acknowledging her monumental and unique contribution to the art of film.